So welcome everybody to the joint IFLA and ILAB webinar, What Happens When a Book is Lost? Cooperation between libraries and the rare books trade and the ILAB Missing Books Register. My name is Daryl Green. In my day job, I'm head of heritage collections at the University of Edinburgh, but I'm also the chair of the IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee. And it's my distinct pleasure to host the webinar this afternoon, or this morning, or this evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. This is the fruit of a long-term collaboration between IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, and ILAB, the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers, who've been working together for several years now on relationship building and sharing information about our professional best practices. And the webinar that we have today really explores how the antiquarian book trade and the library profession can work hand in hand together, as well as some of the new tools that are being developed that will be of use to us all. So the way we're going to run our webinar today is I'm going to do a round of introductions now, so we don't have to go through that as we move through the various different presentations. We have the chat window is open and is being monitored by myself and also by Alexander from Norway, who's our session moderator. At any time, if you'd like to put a question into the chat window, I will definitely say that I will see the questions. I may or may not be able to ask questions, just depending on how we're doing with time, but please do put questions as they come up into the chat window and I'll pick them up chronologically. We have two case studies to start us off this morning. Followed by a presentation of the Missing Books Register and a bit of a conversation between Claudia Bubenik, who's a librarian, and several members of the trade. And then we have a closing plenary by Helen Vincent from the National Library of Scotland. We'll take questions specifically for the two case studies at the end of the two case studies. There'll be time for questions at the end of the presentation, and then we'll close the webinar after Helen finishes. So I'd like to go around and do a brief set of introductions, if that's all right. So I just ask those who I'm introducing if you could just wave so that folks can see who you are. So I'd like to introduce Adrian Harrington. Adrian is an antiquarian bookseller and past president of the UK's Antiquarian Booksellers Association, and also past president of the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers. Angus O'Neill is an antiquarian bookseller based in London and is security chair and vice president of the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers. Angelica Elster is the executive secretary of ILAB, running the day-to-day business of the league, as well as its public relations and administrates the Missing Books Register, which we'll hear more about soon. Mario Giappone is the current president of ILAB and an antiquarian bookseller based in Riva del Garda, which is in Italy. Claudia Bubenik is curator for early and rare printed books at the Bavarian State Library, is a member of the IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee since 2017, and is currently on the part of IFLA lead on the IFLA and ILAB collaboration working group. And finally, Helen Vincent. Helen Vincent is head of rare books, maps, and music collections at the National Library of Scotland. She's a member of IFLA's RBSC, Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee, as well as the Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee. She's involved in working with ILAB and other organizations on this topic that we're on today. She's also working with the International Council on Archives Expert Group Against Theft, Trafficking, and Tampering. So those are a round of speakers. And what I'm going to do now is ask all of our participants to turn their camera off, except for Adrian. And we will start with our first case study. So Adrian, over to you. If you could unmute, and I will turn off my camera.
All right, let's get that out of the way. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Hello, my name is Adrian Harrington. I'm a past chair of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, known as the ABA, and a past president of ILAB. I'm also a rare book dealer based in Tunbridge Wells in Kent in the UK. Back in the 80s, when I was given the task of bringing what was then the ABA stolen book chain up to date, we had no emails or faxes. We were merely given our dealers, we merely gave our dealers the names and phone numbers of 4 other dealers to call whenever we had a report of a book being stolen. Those 4 dealers were also given a list of 4 dealers to call, and so on. This enabled us to spread the word quickly, but only within the UK. As the technology improved, we took a proposal to ILAB, and the ILAB stolen book database was developed. I tell you this brief history to show you that for more than 50 years, we've been active in preventing theft. And where the thief has been successful, sadly, we've prevented him from selling the books, and in many cases have been able to reunite these stolen books with their rightful owners. A useful example of how quickly we can act is to tell you my own experience of one case. The detail is here really to paint a picture of how the trade interacts globally. It began a few days before Christmas Eve in 2005. My shop is run by John Gilbert, the Ian Fleming bibliographer, an ILAB Bibliographical Prize winner, and an expert in all things James Bond. We'd received a call from a gentleman asking about 2 first editions we had of Ian Fleming's Casino Royale. The caller asked intelligent questions about the relative merits of each copy, and on Christmas Eve agreed to buy one of them for £12,500. We discussed the various payment options. Given that this was before the internet banking had really taken off, the choice came down to a credit card with its stiff costs in those days, or a banker's draft, then always regarded as safe. John opted for the draft, and a man duly arrived in a black Mercedes to pay for and collect the book. John took a note of the registration number of the car. We already had his mobile phone number. As it was now too late to pay the check into our bank, I faxed a copy of it to my bank manager. The reason for this action was that John had started to have some misgivings about the transaction. The bad news came back that the banker's draft was part of a batch of blank ones that had been stolen. Our hearts sank. We called the police and put the description of the book out on the ILAB stolen book database. The detective who was given our case showed little interest. "It's just a book," he said. "It's not a unique object, so we won't be able to identify it as yours, even if we found it." We explained at great length where he was wrong in this, but he was deaf to everything. When we gave him the thieves' phone number, he dismissed it as useless. And when we asked him about the car registration number, he said it was a hire car and that the man had paid cash. When I pointed out that credit cards were required for car hire, he merely shrugged. All we got from the detective was indifference and a crime number for our insurance claim. About a month later, we had a call from a dealer in Norfolk telling us that someone had called him and was going to bring in a first edition of Casino Royale to sell. The dealer had seen that the ILAB database listed a copy as stolen. The caller did not bring the book in, and its next appearance was when Otto Penzler, the owner of the mysterious bookshop in New York, called us. He was about to be offered the book, and as luck would have it, he was dining with the retired head of the New York Police Department, commonly known as the NYPD Blue. They would make the necessary arrangements. Then Bauman Books on Madison Avenue called us to say that they were being offered the book as well. They had contacts in the FBI and would bring them in on it. An appointment was made for the seller, a young lady, to bring the book into Bauman's shop. When she arrived with our book, she was arrested, albeit after a brief, what I believe is called a turf war between NYPD and the FBI. I don't know who won, but we could identify the books as ours, as the dust jacket, and its minor flaws were all noted, and it had one unique identifying feature that we hide in our more valuable books. It is at this point, back in England, that our detective woke up. He came to the shop bouncing about as excited as a puppy. The book had been found in New York. He would be flying out there, business class, to pick it up, along with the young lady who had offered our book and whose name we now knew was Holly Maynard. He would bring them both back to England. The British Metropolitan Police had got involved, and he was on his way to brief them. He further informed us that if he went to New York, the NYPD Blue had promised to drive him around Manhattan in one of their cars with the sirens going. He nearly exploded with excitement. I couldn't share his joy, as his earlier incompetence and lack of engagement meant the British taxpayer would be paying for his New York holiday. It transpired that Holly Maynard was the pregnant girlfriend of the thief, who we now know was Wayne Fife, a man with 40 previous convictions going back to 1987. He'd also conned Cartier, De Beers Diamonds, and a London art dealer, as well as many others, so we were in good company. One newspaper report said that the total value of the theft, fraud, and deception perpetrated by Fife was over £7 million. The New York police had been amazing and proved that when all parties cooperate and take book theft seriously, good things happen. The subsequent reports in the British press praised the work of Detective David Rock, who they say reported had led the investigation. There was no mention of ILAB or our involvement in stopping the clear chain of fraud and deception. Oh well, that's life. The main thing is that we stopped Fife, a serial offender who was sent to jail for 6 years, and we got our book back. As we've seen, a good relationship with the police can be very helpful. The ABA have had excellent liaison in the past with them and have often been able to get a dedicated police officer assigned. Inevitably, these people move on, and sadly, we have to start all over again. It is also worth noting that different statutes of limitations of various countries. In the UK, the crime of theft remains a crime with few or no time limits for returning stolen book items to their rightful owners. In brief, in the UK, you cannot give better title than you receive. I know that the statutes vary from country to country, and it would be worth noting what the statutes are in your various countries regarding stolen goods. There are so many other stories that can be told where the antiquarian book trade has helped libraries, collectors, and institutions stop theft and retrieve stolen books, maps, and prints. We have a long history of preventing book theft and are constantly bringing our systems up to date. Part of our strength is that each national association appoints a security chair, and that person liaises with the ILAB security chair. As these appointments are constantly refreshed, new people come in with new enthusiasms and ideas. And so the system never seems to tire or flag in its battle with the book thief. It would help us if you, the librarians, let us know about any concerns, questions, or ideas you may have. We are very keen to work with you all around the world to keep your precious collections safe. And when theft does happen, to help get the stolen book returned. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you very much for that. That was a really great way to get us into the mindset of where these collaborations matter and where they can help each other. Adrian, I'll ask you just to turn your camera off now, and we'll come to you with a few questions in a moment. I'll just remind everybody that's in the session, if you have any questions for our speakers, if you would drop them in the chat window, and I will pick them up at the end of the 2 case studies. So I will ask Angus O'Neill to switch on your camera and your microphone. And Adrian, if you could turn off your camera. And Angus, I'll hand over to you to talk us through the second case study. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. My name's Angus O'Neill. I'm an antiquarian bookseller based in London in the middle of a thunderstorm at the moment. So I hope everything goes according to plan. The case that I'm going to talk about, which many of you will have read or seen something about in the news, is really very different. It's the case of the missing and now mercifully returned Darwin notebooks. Now, I have to begin this with a massive disclaimer, which is to say that I played almost no part in any of this. The people who deserve the credit are, first of all, Jessica Gardner, the Cambridge University librarian, with her colleagues Mark Purcell and Stuart Roberts, their head of communications, who put together a really impressive campaign to publicise these thefts. And within the trade, I feel I have to make a special shout out to the Partnership of Type and Form, Anka Timmerman and Mark James, whose expertise was called in to authenticate the notebooks when they were returned, because it would have been embarrassing all round if they'd been replaced by forgeries. So those are the people who really deserve the praise which is going for this. I'm going to approach it from the point of view of an antiquarian bookseller and to some extent ILAB security chief as well. I was approached very delicately by the University Library in Cambridge in October 2020. They wanted to have a chat with me about something which they were about to make public, and they wanted to enlist the help of the international antiquarian book trade in working up their publicity campaign for it. Now, the items that had gone missing were, frankly, by any standards, extraordinary. There were two notebooks by Charles Darwin, which he produced in 1837, so that's 22 years before the publication of On the Origin of Species, which is one of the great scientific works of all time, of course. Darwin was just back from the Beagle. He produced these tiny notebooks, each about the size of a cigarette packet, if anybody remembers those. And they contain, amongst other things, the famous sketch of the diagrammatic sketch of the Tree of Life, which has been on fridge magnets, every tea towels. It's been reproduced everywhere you can think of, and for once the overused word iconic is not completely inappropriate. So I heard from Cambridge University Library, and I helped Stuart Roberts come up with a useful quote on behalf of the international rare book trade that they could use. Now, their plan was to go public on November the 24th, 2020. The date is not an accident because it's the anniversary of the publication of On the Origin of Species. And they arranged for the whole story to break on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme not long after 6 o'clock in the morning, which is earlier than most people in the antiquarian book trade like to get up. And with apologies to those of you who are on the west coast of the United States at the moment. And so, first of all, I was extremely worried because I had to keep the whole thing very, very secret. I managed to get their permission to mention the episode to Roger Truglone, who was then president of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association in the UK. I was able to mention it to him only the night before. Everybody else, I knew that it had been difficult for Jessica Gardner to get the unqualified support of all the Cambridge authorities to go public on this theft, because the theft, we didn't actually know then that it was a theft, but it was a very bizarre story. Because what had happened 20 years earlier, the notebooks and various other items were taken briefly off-site to be photographed to a very high standard, effectively digitized. That was in September 2000. They then should have gone back into their usual place, but in the strong room. But they weren't there. They were finally listed as missing in January 2001. And everybody assumed, with some justification, that they'd simply been misshelved somewhere. I mean, even by the standards of major university copyright libraries, Cambridge University Library is a big place. It's really not at all problematic that it's very easy to believe that they could simply have been misshelved. So for the next 20 odd years, the university or library authorities conducted a series of searches, but they could not find these things anywhere. And then Jessica Gardner comes on the scene as the new university librarian and realizes with commendable promptness that the whole story has to be made public if there's a realistic chance of these notebooks ever turning up again. The probability of them having been misplaced was simply declining over the years as more and more searches were made. And it began to look more and more likely that they had simply been removed by somebody. And I can't speak with authority on this, but I suspect that there must have been people on the board of the university library, or the syndics as they call them, who were quite reluctant to go public, and the whole process may have involved a certain amount of discussion and horse trading, but the main thing is that Jess Gardner got her way, and the whole story was made public. Of course, my phone started ringing fairly early on the morning of the November 24th, 2020, with a lot of people wanting to know the questions from the answers to the questions from the point of view of an antiquarian bookseller. Could they have been stolen to order by a reclusive billionaire who liked looking at things and not showing them to anybody else? Well, this, I'm afraid, is one of the oldest tropes in the book. It's a lovely story. It almost never has happened. Most billionaires who collect things are only too happy to let the world know what they've got. And you can never say never until you know the full story of something, but this wasn't very likely. Of course, given the commercial world that we inhabit, the other question that everybody wanted to know was, what are they worth? How can you know, how much could you get if these notebooks were to be sold legitimately? And obviously you can't give a really firm answer to that question, but I would like to throw in a couple of points for everyone to consider. One is that the market in significant Darwin material between the year 2000 and 2020 went up about tenfold. In 2000, you could get a nice copy of On the Origin of Species for £20,000 or £30,000. Now it would cost you at least £300,000. A really nice one fetched 440,000 at auction not all that long ago. It's gone up a great deal. Similarly, if we're going to start playing around with values for the two missing notebooks, and in particular the Tree of Life sketch, there is some pattern which we can discern, because Charles Darwin was not a vain man. He and his family used the manuscript of On the Origin of Species as scrap paper. So individual leaves have turned up over the years, and they sometimes have children's drawings on the back or notes about paying the paper boy or whatever. And those used to fetch similarly 20, 30, 40,000 pounds each, which is quite a lot for a scrappy leaf of a manuscript. One, a particularly good one, fetched £45,000 in 1999. Again, they've gone up unbelievably. At Sotheby's on the 10th of July 2018, a single manuscript leaf fetched £490,000 with including the buyer's premium. So that's 560 odd thousand euros. That's pretty well bang on $600,000. So what's the Tree of Life diagram going to be worth? Well, it's going to be tens of millions, I would say. I mean, I think Cambridge University Library in their press release suggested millions, but I think logically it has to be a very high figure. It might break the record for the most expensive work of art ever sold, because if you had many billions of pounds and you wanted to start a museum of the history of science somewhere, that would simply be your star exhibit. You could get people going from all over the world to look at it. So we're really talking about something where certainly, I mean, its value as a cultural icon is colossal. And of course, there's something very vulgar about discussing the cash value of something like this, but there's no point in pretending that it doesn't have the cash value. Anyway, one of the reasons I think for involving the antiquarian book trade in the whole story was so that we could explain to anyone who did have it, possibly in a shoebox on top of a wardrobe somewhere not all that far from Cambridge University Library. We don't know, we may never know, although the case is very far from closed. But we wanted to make it absolutely clear that you weren't going to be able to walk into your local secondhand bookshop and convert this into any money at all, because people would swiftly realize what it was. And they would say, yeah, shouldn't this be in Cambridge University Library? And which the answer is yes. So the story had a happy ending. Well, maybe not quite an ending, but it had a very happy consequence, which was that on the 9th of March 2022, the notebooks were returned. They were wrapped in cling film, they were in their original archival box, and they were supplied, and this is a really rather bizarre touch, in a bright pink gift bag. And when I say bright pink, it could not have been brighter. If you look at the Cambridge University Library website, you can see pictures of it. With a little printed card attached saying, "Librarian, Happy Easter," and then either an X or a kiss, depending on how you want to interpret it. So this was great news. They are now back where they belong. Very happily, they were able to be exhibited in a superb exhibition which the University Library put on to mark the completed publication of Darwin's Correspondence, which was a huge and amazing and wonderful project. And so really everybody was happy. And although I like to think that the book trade played a small part in this, as I said at the beginning, it's Jessica Gardner, Mark Purcell, Stuart Roberts, and Anke Timmerman and Mark James who really deserve the credit for this. But it was an extraordinary story. One day we may find out who took them and why, but for the moment, we're just terribly glad that it all turned out the way it did. So that's really all I can say about it. I hope you found it amusing.
Angus, thank you very much. I think that story being in the public is somewhat well known, but to hear some of the background conversations that were happening and also some of the rationale to those conversations was really very helpful. I have a number of questions, both for you and Adrian. So I'd ask Adrian, if he can, to turn his camera and microphone back on so that the three of us can have a bit of a conversation. Adrian, are you there?
I should be. I just put on self-view, self-view gallery. Why am I not showing up?
You need to turn on your camera.
Yeah, it's supposed to be on. Sorry about this, folks. Best laid plans. Camera start there. Am I there? Okay.
No, we can hear you fine, but we'll let you fiddle about a little bit while I ask my first question, if that's okay. So my question is really for both of you. I mean, we've had now over the last 5 or 6 years, several conversations between IFLA and ILAB and sometimes law enforcement as well. So, for example, there you are, Adrian, your camera's working. The seminar that we hosted in Columbus, Ohio, had somebody from the FBI that was in attendance. And I just wonder, you made a comment in passing, Adrian, about law enforcement taking book theft seriously, which seems to be a kind of never-ending sine curve of how successful that is. I'm just wondering, currently, are we seeing a trend with law enforcement, local, national, international, that are taking book theft seriously, or is it a constant struggle, a constant conversation to keep this a live issue, or where are we at in terms of law enforcement taking book theft seriously?
I can only speak for the UK at present, but sadly throughout my time, and it probably came through in what I said, my personal experience of the police in Britain is that they take most theft not very seriously. Book theft, they just do not understand. In the past, I've given them the name and address of the thief, and they accused me of being a Sherlock Holmes. I gave them, at one point, books had been obtained fraudulently from us. I went to the post office to stop the parcel being posted, failed in that. I told the police that if they're at this particular address at 9 in the morning, they would find someone standing outside the address waiting for the postman to come. They would say to the postman, "Oh, that's for me," and take the parcel. It was just a front address. The police were not interested. I wish they were. We have had good results in the UK where we have managed to build a relationship and get an assigned officer through the ABA. But sadly, people move on. One of the strengths of the system that we have nationally and through ILAB is that I'm sure it's the same with you, we are regularly renewing our committees, and the security chair probably gets changed every 2 to 4, 5 years, and a new person comes in, they take their brief seriously. So there's a constant reinvigoration of the process. So sadly, when we do get a liaison officer, they move on, they get promoted or they retire or something, and you have to start the process of getting a new one assigned, training them up. I have to say my experience with the United States Police has always been very positive. I had a very good result with the Albanian police with some Harry Potters that we got returned to us, some rare first editions. They had made it to Albania, and the Albanian police were very cooperative, but it's always a problem within my experience to persuade them that books do have a value, and that all theft is theft and should be taken seriously. Now, within the ABA, there's probably a different experience, and I'm sure Angus might report differently. But if you can build a relationship, and in the New York experience, both dealers who had spotted it on the ILAB database had personal friends in the FBI and in the New York Police Department who managed to pull levers for them. Without that, I'm not sure we'd have got the same result.
Adrian, thanks. And Angelica has asked me just to prod perhaps both you and Angus on the warehouse thefts in 2017 and the resulting finding of those thefts in Romania. Do either of you want to mention that event? Angus, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about that. It was very encouraging because the UK police behaved superbly about that. They really were very much on top of things. Historically, we have had problems in the UK because the art and antiques squad is ludicrously underfunded and undermanned, and often consists of just 1 or perhaps 2 people. So even if you get a good working relationship with him or her or them, it's really very frustrating to get things actually done. But I think that Angelica will be able to confirm this, but last September in Oxford, ILAB, as part of their Congress, we had a symposium in which one of the sessions was discussing book security. And there was a memorable and very moving presentation from Jessica Gardner about the Darwin notebooks. There was also a very worthwhile piece done by two of the policemen who were involved with the Felton Library heist, if one can call it that, which one probably should. That was the occasion when some thieves broke in through the roof of a warehouse near Heathrow Airport, and took away some boxes of antiquarian books, which were eventually discovered concreted over in the basement in Romania. It's an extraordinary story, so I would advise anybody who is interested to go to the ILAB website and follow the link to the symposium. So I think things are getting better, but we have to keep on explaining to them that books, they may look like multiples to people who don't deal with them all the time, but more often than not, there are ways in which we can tell them apart, and they can be worth surprisingly large amounts of money. And obviously, once we really have to persuade the police and authorities in all the different countries that the books can be a very efficient way of taking around large quantities of funds just in a briefcase or whatever. And furthermore, I think there has been an increase in the use of books and works of art as collateral linked to other bits of organized crime, people trafficking, terrorism, and so on. And if that won't encourage the law enforcement authorities to take things seriously, I don't know what will. Yeah. But I think the situation is gradually improving, but it does have a way to go.
I think I think there's probably an important point that's developed out of our conversation over several years now, is that this is not a one pill will solve it problem. It's a problem that will constantly have to work together, both across the trade and the profession, but also with law enforcement, because as Adrian mentioned, there's constant turnover in law enforcement, just as there is in other sides of the conversation as well. And it's important that we're open about the conversations that we have, and that we continue to work with law enforcement to try and get them to understand things like marks of provenance, or what makes a unique copy of a printed book identifiable if it passes through law enforcement hands. It is a constant. It is not just a solution.
Sorry, I was going to say that thing about where I touched on, where the police just said, well, it's a book. There's no, all books are the same. They're not. We have a secret mark we put in. I'm reminded of the Durham University, Durham College copy of the first folio, which was uniquely identified because its dimensions had been recorded. And of course, the book is cropped, so its dimensions are unique to that copy. And I would encourage in all cataloguing of rare books by librarians to make them as unique in the description as possible, with things like dimensions or closed tears or a thumb mark on page 98, etc.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I've certainly been involved in advisory capacity on several cases where the law enforcement have actually used the data that's in catalogs, library catalogs, as evidence to prove that this was a particular copy of that book. It's unique. Yeah. Another question from me, and it's a question that we juggle with all the time. I mean, certainly anecdotally, and I think borne out by some evidence, theft, internal theft, is something that the library profession has long had to deal with and has long been quite quiet about, although there has been some public cases. But it's actually internal theft is probably a higher percentage of when things go missing, rather than external theft. I was wondering, for the trade, does the trade have a similar trend? Are you seeing theft come from outside, or sorry, got a squeaky trolley, or are you seeing theft coming in? Are you seeing theft coming in from outside, or is there internal theft that you have to be aware and vigilant of as well?
Well, if I So are you asking, do we have a problem? I know there are some rogue librarians who've been around, a couple of instances spring to mind. They've been stopped, thank goodness. Do booksellers, do we have a history of theft within the trade?
Yes.
Only, not really, no. Booksellers tend to not steal from each other. I can't think of any instances where booksellers steal from each other. It tends to be outsiders stealing from us. And if we are offered books, we do due diligence. We have the ILAB database. There are other databases. And if we have a suspicion, we put questions out on our own internal emails. And if we're suspicious of a character, we will ask in our internal emails, anyone having dealings with this person, could they let us know? So we have internal systems, but luckily, Angus may correct me, but I can't think of cases where booksellers have stolen from booksellers on any notable level. Angus, do you?
I'm afraid I'm obviously not going to name names, but there are one or two I have experienced one or two instances of it. Yeah. But it doesn't happen very often, but it has happened.
Okay, we have a comment from John Lancaster, who just wanted to ask if either of you remember the late Catherine Keyes Lieb, who developed the Bookline Alert Missing Books and Manuscripts, which I think was a database. Either of you know that database? 1970s, apparently. So,
well, it doesn't ring a bell. There were early attempts, continuing attempts to come up with systems. With the modern world, we have amazing systems that allow us to do it. Previous ones were probably clunky and difficult to spread the word about.
Yeah. I mean, I only really knew Kathy Lieb and her husband through the American Book Prices Current, which they owned. They were a marvelous couple who did a huge amount for the trade. I was only very dimly aware of BAM because it was really very much a US thing as far as I can work out. But yes, I mean, we need more people like the Liebs.
Yeah. Last comment from me, which may prod a further comment from the both of you, is the importance of going public. Certainly in the case of the Darwin notebooks, but also, I mean, I remember reading the article, I think it was in the Independent, that broke the news about the warehouse burglary in 2017. And there's been several other cases where things have actually made national media, and in almost all those cases have been resolved as well. And so I'm wondering if you just had, as a closing comment to this first round of case studies, if you could talk a little bit about the importance of going public and letting folks know that something is missing and you'd like their help.
Angus, do you want to?
Yes, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the only caveat that I would say is that we really have to be very careful not to interfere with the work of the law enforcement authorities, that we have to be guided by them. Once they've taken an interest and they're investigating something, then we really do have to take their advice about how much can go into the public domain or not. And it could be that there are one or two cases which we'll hear about later this year or next year, which is just too early to go public with yet. Yeah. But generally, you know, it's the old cliche of sunlight being the best disinfectant. The more information you can get out there in the public domain, the harder it makes lives for the thieves, and that's what we want.
Wonderful. I'd echo all of that, and of course, in any particular instances, the law enforcement have to be called in, but also in the run-up to that, we would discuss with the person or people or institution that have lost the book or books, the best way forward. We all have the same intention, which is to get the book back and to catch the thief, ideally, and to stop the thief and to stop the method of stealing as well, to block up any security gaps there may be. And sometimes, so really the question is about timing. I agree with Angus entirely that shedding light on things is the best thing possible, and transparency is really good. Timing, though, comes into it in as much as sometimes when you release the data, you get the maximum effect. And the librarians, if it's a library, the library might want to tidy up. It's identified a loophole or a gap. It might like to tidy it up before it goes public. The timing and basically, yes, get the news out there.
Great. Thank you both.
Where to go.
Thank you very much. I think we'll finish up this first portion on that note. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and speaking specifically and generally to the cases that you've been involved with. What I'll ask you to do is if you could mute both of your microphones, but leave your cameras on. And I'll ask Angelica, Angelica, Claudia, and Mario to turn on their cameras. And Angelica, I will ask you to unmute and to prepare to share your screen. So we're going to move into the second stage of our webinar, which is a presentation on the new, missing books register hosted by ILAB. Angelica will talk us through the new register and where it comes from and how it's used. And then we've got a conversation afterwards as well. Angelica, over to you.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Daryl. And thanks very much to Claudia and Daryl and Helen and Stephanie and also Alexander for putting this event together today and for allowing us to present our system. So I will actually just talk you through the new ILAB Missing Books Register, and I'm going to show you a few elements of the site. But before I do this, I would like to, like Adrian touched on this already, I just want to emphasize again that theft and security have always been a major concern for the League. So this Missing Books Register is not a new system. It's basically a relaunch. The ILAB had systems in place since the 1970s. Adrian was just talking about a telephone chain, and I think you had just according to the technology of the day. ILAB had since 2001 a security mailing list, which is still in use, and it's actually usually the first step when we inform the trade is that we send an email which goes immediately to all ILAB booksellers worldwide about a theft. In 2004, ILAB set up a third database, and in 2010, ILAB launched its ILAB Stolen Books website. So that then led to the Missing Books Register, but since 2010, we had that website. And in 2019, we had a very successful event at the Glory Club in New York. And as a result of this symposium came this relaunch of the Missing Books Register, which we then relaunched in 2021. So the Missing Books Register, how do I access it? It's very simple. You either go to the ILAB website. I've done screenshots and you see my arrows of where to go and what to do. Go to the ILAB website, ilab.org, or you can go directly into missingbooksregister.org. It's got its own URL, own domain. And I'm just going to show today how to report an item, report a theft, and how to search an item. It's the other elements are fairly self-explaining, but basically, when you experience a theft and you want to report this to ILAB, we refer to this as reporting and the reporter. So the librarian or the private person who experiences a theft is in this case a reporter. So you go to report, and up on that page where it says report a stolen or missing item, you register a new account, and it's a fairly straightforward process. We ask you for some basic information. Then we receive an email that we had a new entry. You, as the reporter, receive an email. Please check your inbox. You have to activate. You have to activate your account through a link, which I should probably move my. Yeah, you activate your account, and when you activate your account, you set yourself a password, and with that, I'm going to move this. Okay, Daryl, can I just close this. I think I can. Yeah. Ah, that's better. So then you log into the. You set yourself a password. You log in, and you see you have this login button, and with your new username and the password, you log in into the back end of the web of the missing books register. And this is really when you start reporting your theft. So now you will see that these buttons change into reporter tools and logout. So when you're logged in, you see the logout button. You must go to reporter tools because this takes you to the section where you report your details. First, you just verify your profile. There's part of it was information that you put in when you first signed up. And now what is important is, and that's where a lot of people send me questions when they do it. ILAB distinguishes between two elements. We report an incident and we report an item. The incident is basically the description of how it happened, where it happened. It's the circumstances of the theft. And then we allocate the missing items to that incident. So you first report an incident. The incident is not the stolen book. So you add in all the information. You see this is a three-step process we put in a progress bar. So you see that you have to take several steps. So you now, you put in a short description of your incident, you put in the date when it happened, how did it happen. Please give us as much information as possible. Has it been reported to the police? Who is the law enforcement agency? What is the case number? All of this information is very, very important and valuable to us. When you save this, a new box opens up, and that's where you can now add items. So this is now where you actually report the actual stolen or missing book. And again, what Angus said earlier, it is really important to be as copy, and Adrian as well, as copy specific as possible. We need detailed information. Any information you have, taking the time and the trouble is really worth it, because we can then identify the object, and yes, books were printed in multiple copies. So this is crucial that we have really detailed information. Where possible, please add photographs. You can add up to 10 photographs, I think, per item, and yeah, and then you save your entry. You will get an email. I will receive, or the ILAB office will receive an email. We check this in-house. We just have to check that the listing was done correctly. And once this listing has been approved by us, you receive an email, as the reporter receives an email, that it's now online, and it can be looked up on the ILAB website. So, sorry, on the ILAB Missing Books Register homepage. So you go onto the Missing Books Register homepage, you scroll down, and you either see the section called Recently Listed. So the book we just reported is now listed here. You can click on it, and you see the circumstances, so the incident is described properly with details of the reporting organization, telephone number, email address, all those details you put in. And then, of course, the item itself with its bibliographical description and an image library. And you can, of course, now, because it's now in the public domain, you can search it. So this is how you generally search a book. You go to search, or you scroll a bit further down on the homepage to search the database. And if I put in that Jane Austen that we just reported missing, it will come up in the search, and you could click on it and find all those details again. I would also just like to draw attention to one section of the Missing Books Register. We have set up a guidance page where we offer PDFs for download for different target groups. So there is one information sheet done just for libraries. I think it contains some valuable information. It's unlikely that anyone reads this when a theft happens, but while we have you today as the audience and interested in this, it's good to download this, to have this on hand. Please share this with your colleagues. And if there's any other information you think that should be in, just give us feedback. So this guidance sheet is available under the guidance section. And then, of course, I just want to say, please do not hesitate to contact us. When a theft happens, it's often a very stressful time. We are here to help you. We're just an email away, and you either contact Angus O'Neill, our security chair, or myself. This information stays with us. We do not share this information until we have spoken to you or to the reporter how we would like to disseminate this information. You also can contact the National, if you have an Antiquarian Booksellers Association in your country. That's another way of contacting the trade. So you can either contact ILAB, or you speak, as Adrian and Angus mentioned before, you speak to your National Antiquarian Booksellers Association. ILAB is a federation of bookseller associations, like IFLA is a federation. So our members are 22 national associations, and we work with them all the time. So we're in direct contact with them. So they would also pass on this information. So if you feel more comfortable to speak to your national association, all the details are also on the ILAB website. Just go to our ilab.org website. In the menu bar, you find a section, you see associations, and it lists all the 22 national associations that are member of ILAB. Now, just summarizing a little bit what I just said, when you set up an account, please report as many details as possible about you and your institution, because we need to verify your details, and it really helps. We send you an email if we're unsure, we get in contact with you. When you report an item, please be as detailed and copy specific as possible, and please add image material if you have it available. Then the distinction, please remember, we talk about an incident and an item. So the incident is the circumstance of the theft. The item or the items are then attached to this incident. And also very important, what often gets forgotten, please report when a book was found, because that's when often the problem is solved. But please contact us when you know you have listed this with us or with the National Booksellers Association. Please report that it was found so we can take this offline. And the most important for us is please report. It's very important that the trade is informed. You can email us almost 24/7 on security matters. We really pick up those emails all the time. Yeah, we appreciate your feedback. So that's from me about the system. I stop my share. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions.
Dear Angelica, thank you very much for this great and informative presentation of the missing books register. I think we all benefited a lot from it, and it is of great interest, not only for the librarians among us, but for all listeners and stakeholders to be able to use this database. You mentioned that ILAB is the international umbrella organization of the rare book trade, and that booksellers on all continents belong to the ILAB network and are, of course, members of their respective national antiquarian booksellers associations. So what do I do if I miss a book? Should I first contact the ILAB, or is it better to first contact the national committee in my country? How does ILAB works as a team?
Can I answer? Shall I answer here? Yes, both is fine. I see that we have some participants here in today, where I know there is no National Antiquarian Booksellers Association. We don't have one in Romania, for example, and we don't have one in Mexico. Yes, then please contact us directly. But if you prefer to speak, sometimes it's also a language issue. If you prefer to speak to the chair or the board of the national association in your country, that's fine. And we work together, and they know that security matters get reported. I think what's also important to say here is we don't have a template we have systems in place, but we adapt them to case by case to every situation. You can't treat all security matters in the same way, but what we can say is that these matters are treated in a confidential way. We will always approve everything with the reporting institution or with the reporting private individual. But we have systems in place that we communicate on national, international level between the associations, our board and their board. So I think an email to the ILAB Secretariat and an email to the president of the National Association, if you have one in your country, is absolutely appropriate. And then we will respond fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. It's well, and sometimes, as we have also heard, losses only become known later. So would it then still be advisable to report to the MDR, even if the loss may have occurred years ago? Or to put it in another way, why is timely reporting so important? What channels do you have to go on very fast?
And maybe I can give an answer to this. Hello, everybody. I'm Mario Giupponi, actual ILAB president, and I take the opportunity to thank again this webinar, which gives us the possibility to promote and to let you know what our project of the Missing Book Register is. And to answer to this, I would say that, okay, in the case you become aware of a book theft, it is certainly necessary to report it promptly, of course, through the Missing Book Register. We therefore ask you to act as quickly as possible so that the information regarding the theft can be given immediately. And it's important, I repeat this again, it's important to give all the details because as already Angus said and Angelica said, all the small details help us to make us understand which copy is it, because the books are often similar. But to come back to your question, we have to say that it's never too late. That is, if you become aware of a theft that happens maybe even a long time ago, you should still report it. In the event, one should try to specify as best when this happened, and in such cases it will be clearly more difficult to prevent the stolen property from having already started its way, because we know that a stolen book, a stolen good, will have an own life, and we never know where we will go. Anyway, it is very important to list it among the stolen property, because at least you will be probably able to stop the series of steps that it might still be taking. And these are the general rules to follow. And anyway, I want to repeat again, as ILAB, Antiquarian bookseller, we don't want to have to do with stolen books. As president, I can say that. And with the creation of the Missing Book Register, we are also asking you, librarians, to cooperate and to help us to follow this path. And thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you very much, Mario. So it's kind of worth to discuss if the entry in the Missing Books Register could be part of a library crisis plan in case something is stolen or missed. Angus, you are mute.
Yeah, I think I've now unmuted myself. Yes, I mean, one thing that I would like to stress is that this is very much a work in progress. What we're not saying to all the librarians watching this is, here is our wonderful system. You know, this is how we're going to do it. We want to hear from everybody. I know that there will be librarians watching this who are saying, well, you know, why don't they do such and such a thing? Why haven't they thought of that? Maybe we have, maybe there's a reason why we're not doing it like that. But I cannot stress too much and too often that this is a cooperative effort between the book trade and the library profession. We really will be only too happy to hear from you with any suggestions in which this project can be improved.
Yeah. Thank you, Angus. As it said, a system is always as good as its entries and the people who work with it and who take care to tell immediately also if a book is found. So it's always on an actual state, and that's very important, of course. Thank you very much. And is there also, I think, Angelica, you mentioned it already, if a library or a private person wishes to remain anonymous, and so is there also the possibility, for whatever reason, to report losses confidentially, so that they are recorded internally, but not to the public? I don't know if there are many cases like this, but if someone wants to report confidentially, so he or she would report to the secretary or to the security chair, or Angus or Angelica.
Angus, you want to?
Yes, the one thing that I should say is that we have to know who's doing the reporting, because otherwise we could get caught up between marital disputes, we could get caught up with business arguments about the ownership of the book and so on, or there might just be somebody who wanted to report a book out of malice. There are all sorts of things. So somebody in ILAB needs to know, but it doesn't, you know, and Angelica has to know, but really nobody else does. And we want to work with whoever's reporting the theft or the book going missing. We know all too well that there'll be situations where it's extremely embarrassing or politically very difficult for an institution to admit that they've lost something, and we can work with that. Obviously, the more information we can put in the public domain, the better will be the chances of getting the item back. But we're here to provide a service. We will work with whatever limitations you have to give us.
Okay, thank you very much. I see there are two questions in the...
Yeah, Claudia, I'll just ask the first one on behalf of the questioner. There's a question about historic missing items. Certainly libraries do have records of items that have been missing off our shelves for, in some cases, decades. Would it be helpful to have this historic data in the MBR as well?
If I may, okay. I think that this is possible and useful. As said before, we are here also to get all the old information about missing items. It will be always very useful to have them. Don't worry about that. I mean, even if something that is has been missed like 10 years ago or something like that, do inform us, and then we will probably ask more information and try to give us all the possible information about the time where it was stolen or missed or something. Anyway, that's also possible, in my opinion. Yeah.
Angelica, sure.
And sometimes it's a bit tricky when you have historic data, because the way the data was captured, and that was actually our biggest challenge setting up the new register. You work with data from 20 years ago, and it's not very complete. So it could actually be a negative to list this on the missing books register. So we will work on a case-by-case basis. But yes, please, if there is data and you can confirm that this data you still can confirm as missing, I think we will absolutely include the data into the database. We will just have to find a way of how's the data presented, we do have, now I'm talking very practical, we do have a way of sending, if we hope this never happens to anyone, but sending you even a spreadsheet where we can ask you to fill in the columns in a certain way so you can do a mass upload, because suddenly you experience a theft of 50 items. So there are ways of doing it, but the first step is communicate with us, and if there's any historic data, we will definitely try and accommodate that. If it's always technically possible, that we have to decide when we see it.
Rookie mistake. I needed to unmute. I think we'll close with one final question that came in via the Q&A section as well. Is there a system that booksellers notify a library, an official system that booksellers notify a library if they notice provenance of a specific library, or otherwise that somebody's trying to sell, i.e. is there a reverse process? What happens when a bookseller notices a book that they know to be belonging to a library? Is there any kind of official process, or is it just a one-to-one, case-by-case basis? Angus, yeah, sure.
Well, I think normally we would rely on the bookseller to use their initiative and just first of all have a look at the library's online catalogue and see if the book is there, and then contact them direct, because again, the faster this can happen, the more likely it is to be successful. We don't want to have everything formally going through too many participants, just because that increases the possibility of confusion and delay and everything else. But certainly, I mean, if a bookseller contacted us and said, I have a book which I think may have come from such and such a library, and we haven't been able to contact them, or we haven't had a reply, then we would help them do that. We'd probably get in touch with the National Association of the country where the library was based. We'd very basically light a very gentle fire under them to try and persuade them to take the request seriously. And usually we've had very good feedback from libraries. One colleague of mine I know was offered some books that had come from a particular institutional library. It didn't have any withdrawn stamps. He rang them up and said, oh, we've got some books that seem to have been in your library in the 1960s. And they said, oh yes, we threw a whole lot of stuff out in the 70s. We just put it all on a skip. We don't know, on a dumpster. So of course there are no, there are no withdrawn stamps. We didn't have time, which is obviously very sad, but it's better than nothing. But yeah, it's a mixture of common sense, but we will always we'll always help you and advise you if we possibly can.
Great, thank you. Adrian, I'll hand over to you just for a brief comment, and then we need to move on. Adrian.
I'll keep it very brief, but it does raise the issue of, it would help us enormously if libraries did deaccession any books they deaccession properly, so that their records are clear as well. It would help everyone. The dumpster solution, I think, is no longer used, or I'd hope it isn't, but it was quite prevalent in the 60s, I know. So if we all keep proper records, it helps everyone.
Great. That's a great point to close on. So I'd like to thank Angus and Adrian, Angelica, Mario, and Claudia for walking us through both the new online tool and the new register, as well as talking through some of the examples how to use it. I'll ask you all now to mic mute and camera off, and I'll ask Helen to step to the virtual floor, and I'll hand over to you to close out with your thoughts on the wider situation. Helen, over to you.
Thanks, Daryl, and thanks everybody for this really great demonstration of the database and the stories, which I think give a lot to reflect about. I'm speaking today from the National Library of Scotland, where my predecessor as head of rare books, Dr. Brian Hilliard, was an early adopter of the idea that we libraries should be transparent about missing books. So this library has shared information about missing books via the earlier iteration of the Missing Books Register. I've had the great pleasure of reporting that items have been located and can be removed from it. We've worked with the trade to reunite books with their institutional owners. So I'm very much a living witness to the value of the Missing Books database and the culture of sharing information that we have today. What we've seen today, I think we've been reminded that dealing with missing books can seem to have a glamorous side, as Adrian mentioned, driving around with the FBI in cars with screaming lights, but it also has a lot of unglamorous work going on behind the scenes for which you don't get any credit whatsoever, and very hard-working side. In listening to these stories of actual thefts, one thing that came clear to me is we need to support one another in sharing these stories. In this age of media controversy and social media, it's really easy for the transparency that we all agree is necessary to help us share information and reunite books with their owners. There can be a negative consequence to that in terms of PR if a story is taken up the wrong way. So as fellow professionals, we can all work supportively with one another in dealing with the media, in dealing with social media. One of the great merits of the ILAB database for me is that it is fully accessible and really easy to update. You don't need, all you need is a login, and as Angelica said, if you can't cope with the technology or if it doesn't work for you to update the database live, there are other ways to enter the content. So there's an instant reach to the trade. There's no need to have a special qualification, unlike some of the law enforcement databases where it can be very difficult to get material that has been missing uploaded into those so that law enforcement agencies are aware of thefts across borders. I will say one comment that Stephanie Per, who is a member of IFLA's, it works at the National Library of Qatar, which is one of IFLA's PAC centres, Preservation and Conservation Centres, has raised the question a couple of times that one of the misuses of transparent reporting of thefts has been the creation of false authenticity of items which have been forged or stolen, that somebody reports it and creates a false provenance trail for when this item then, quote, resurfaces. And I think that's a caveat about sharing information. It sounds to me as though the ILAB database does have ways in place to check the authenticity and not create those false positives. We certainly really appreciate all the work that has been going on behind the scenes with ILAB to set it up and make it such a shareable and transparent database. I think the final thing I was thinking about today was resources for collection management. When we think about digitization, we think about preservation and access. We don't always think about security. We don't always have an easy way to log reference photographs in our image management systems. And when we're thinking about resources for some of the most mundane collection management tasks, we need to think about the security aspect and the risk of these are really good and easy ways to mitigate the risk of loss or damage to our collections. The importance to libraries of collaborating with the book trade is witnessed by the fact that this webinar today is part of an official group of IFLA and ILAB. It's part of a jigsaw of collaboration that includes collections protection, registration of cultural heritage collections in IFLA's own risk register, UNESCO's Memory of the World programme, and other national and local registers, national bibliographies and union catalogues, and collaboration with law enforcement agencies. I'm aware I've just thrown a lot of words at you, so I'm just going to share my screen now to represent that to you in a way that perhaps makes it clearer, this cooperation between us. And you can see this jigsaw here, how these things all fit together. I want to highlight two other collaborations really relevant to this work against theft and for the return of missing and stolen items. And the first is IFLA's collaboration with the International Council on Archives expert group against theft, trafficking and tampering. And the second is our collaboration with Blue Shield International, which is an organization committed to the protection of the world's cultural property. It quite often deals with response in the event of armed conflict, natural or human-made disaster, but it is also interested in this question of theft and trafficking. And we work together, as Angus mentioned, one of the difficulties of our working together is how we work with law enforcement agencies. And with both of these organizations, we can all lobby law enforcement agencies at international and national level and provide also training and advice so that they are better equipped to recognize stolen documentary heritage when they see it. In particular, ICA EGAT has a current live project, loss registration and information tool with and for law enforcement agencies, which is working specifically with Interpol in the first instance to improve law enforcement agencies' understanding of the characteristics of documentary heritage and the reporting of documentary heritage items to their database, and also hoping to produce guidance and resources for archives and libraries to help and improve the filing of reports to law enforcement agencies. And we're hoping that that project will run throughout 2023 and there'll be results to share back. I want to finish by talking about ethics. Underlying all these practices, all this sharing information and working together to identify and recover books to their rightful owners are the ethical principles under which we operate as professionals. One of the great benefits of professional associations like IFLA and ILAB and our great national library and book trade associations is that in addition to practical advice, we can develop shared ethical principles to support our members in their work by articulating a framework for moral actions. I know how seriously ILAB takes the ethical aspect of its work, and today an ethical code for those of us who work in libraries with cultural collections is more essential than ever. To help us move beyond what Christian Jensen, speaking at the Rare Book and Special Collections recent symposium, Libraries in Time of War, memorably called cultural decency. The idea that we don't need to verbalize any of this stuff because we all have a gentlemanly way of doing business. So I want to end with a challenge to you. Does IFLA, do your own professional association and sector, need clearer or stronger ethical codes regarding these issues around our rare material collections? Is more training and awareness needed about these ethical issues? Can you, as a rare book librarian, as a member of a professional association, as a bookseller, work to develop these codes so that the robust and transparent shared framework is in place that enables us all to act justly and in the best interests of the wonderful cultural heritage objects that we all want to preserve now and in the future, whether in public or private hands or circulating in the trade? Thank you.
Helen, thank you very much. Your comments are spot on and timely and provide a nice summary of where our conversation has taken us today. I'd ask everybody to turn their cameras back on that were part of the session today and keep your microphones off. And just to thank everybody who's around the table today. We've moved across several different cases and explored collaboration. I think Helen's points there at the very end are spot on. You know, I think in general, report, make things known, make things aware, and share information. That's not only within your institution, within the profession, but also with those who we collaborate with most often, which is with the trade or the trade with the library profession. Ethics, we need to continue to do a bit of navel gazing and perhaps help others as well look at their ethical standpoints and look at the ways that us as national and international organizations hold our ethics out to the public. And finally, acting together. This webinar wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a collaboration between these two organizations, between IFLA and ILAB. And several of the conversations, several of the cases that have taken place have resolved because of acting together, reaching across the aisle, as it were, and working together. So on that note, I'd like to thank everybody around the table here. I'd like to thank Helen for her closing comments, for Angelica for taking us through the presentation of the MBR, for Claudia for moderating the discussion, and for Angus, for Mario, and for Adrian for all of your comments and your evidence on your case studies as well. That's us. We will bring this webinar to a close. For those who have attended today, this has been recorded and we will make it available online. We'll communicate out to those who registered for attendance and communicate it out through ILAB and through IFLA's official communication channels as well. And that should hopefully come out in the next fortnight or so. Thank you, everybody. We will draw the webinar to a close. Alexander, who's in the background from Norway, thank you to you for hosting our session. And I now ask you to bring the webinar to a close. Thank you.